Hey everyone, welcome to another wonderful day of Ottoman history, and today we are going to be talking about something called the Ottoman Civil War, or really an interregnum, basically a period when they just couldn't decide who was going to be the ruler. It happened around 1402 to 1413, and it tells us a little bit about the dynamics, the succession dynamics, and the power dynamics, and the political dynamics of the Middle East of this period. We're going to jump right into it. But first, the main character or baddie in this story is a guy named Temur, in English also known as Tamerlane, which is from the word Timur Lang, which is Timur the Lame, because he had a problem. He injured his leg when he was a young man, and he therefore had a limp. That didn't stop him, though, from conquering many parts of the Middle East. As you can see here, at its height in around 1405, Timur was essentially trying to recreate the conquest of Chinggis Khan, that is Genghis Khan, and the Chinggizid empires. Of course, since 1258, 1250s, and the giant conquest of the Mongols had been kind of the standard bearers of what it means to be a real king and a world emperor. And they formed the kind of the basic model of rule and of ideas about rule for much of the world. Now, Timur himself was basically a sort of prince. He wasn't even a prince; he was a nomad, but he had some good capacity as a military strategist and a warrior. And of course, being lame while riding a pony doesn't stop you from attacking and being good on the battlefield. And he parlayed that success into marrying a descendant of Chinggis Khan. And from there, from his base in what is today Uzbekistan and Samarkand, he expanded far, first down into South Asia, right, conquering Delhi and other places, and then into Iran, and then eventually into the edges of the area that he tried to recreate the Mongol conquest, which is in Anatolia. Of course, he stopped in Damascus, where we have some nice recordings of him by Arab chroniclers at the time. Now, for us, the important thing, we're not going to dwell too much about the Timurids, though they did create, the Timurids being his dynasty, though they did create a cultural pastiche of poetry and art and other forms of culture from their capital in Herat, in what's today Afghanistan, that came to influence all over the Middle East and China and South Asia throughout the 15th century. This became the basic model that the Ottomans would then try to define themselves against as they became a world empire. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Now, the real thing that is important here is that eventually the Timur comes to Anatolia, and when he comes there, he's gearing up for the fight with the Ottomans, who are the major power there. And remember, there's still a lot of other various princelings, principalities, beyliks, that is, who had just actually been often eliminated by the Ottomans. They'd been kind of forcefully integrated into the Ottoman Empire. And some of those people had gone to Timur and complained and said, if you come to Anatolia, you'll find quick and easy pickings. Everyone will abandon the Ottomans. And in fact, that's exactly what happened. The Ottomans went out to meet this kind of invincible, unstoppable army of Timur, and basically all of their forces abandoned them, all of them except for two groups, the Janissaries, right, the slave soldiers, who were specifically made to be a centralized army under the control of the Sultan. And here they really proved their worth. They became they showed the fact that they were actually loyal, even when it was clear that they would be defeated. And interestingly, his Serbian troops, so basically his Christian troops and his slave troops, became the most loyal protectors. Long story short, the battle was a quick win for the Timurids. Bayezid was actually captured alive, and they take him back to Samarkand in a cage along with two of his sons, Musa and Mustafa. Now, you might wonder, why did they take the sons? Well, this goes back to kind of common tactic of warfare and statecraft back then, that if you could capture one of your enemy's sons, and we'll get into why this is important, you could release them out later, and they could become valid claimants to the throne, and therefore disrupt succession proceedings and destabilize your enemy's country even after you leave. So Timur basically defeats the Ottomans, but then he doesn't try to really rule Anatolia. He's not trying to do it. He just leaves a giant power vacuum and runs back to his capital in Samarkand, which is today in Uzbekistan, basically Central Asia. Now, interestingly, this defeat of the Ottomans, who were kind of inspiring fear into so many different people at that time, but especially European powers, who saw them as kind of this unstoppable force of the Turks. The sudden defeat of Sultan Bayezid by Timur actually inspired a lot of different art, specifically a lot of operas. A surprising number of important operas that were written trying to depict that scene, but also, as we can see here on the left, a variety of Oriental art and visual depictions of that in the 16th to 19th century, such as this later one, where a Russian artist is imagining the encounter between Timur, seen walking here in a sort of imagined Central Asian ikat robe, and the Ottoman Sultan Bayezid kind of kept prisoner in the palace here. Now, interestingly, here on the right is a Mughal, that is South Asian depiction, probably from the 18th century, of the encounter between Timur and Bayezid. Here, Bayezid being brought in chains to the victorious leader Timur, who was on the throne here. Now, for us, the more important part as well is that in this power vacuum, the Sultan and his two sons, Musa and Mustafa, were gone. So that left two other sons vying for control of what's left of the Ottoman Empire, basically to kind of recreate it. So now there were three other brothers. There's Suleiman and Edirne, Isa and Bursa, and Mehmed and Amasya, and they basically just fought each other bitterly. Now, you might imagine this is an unprecedented civil war, but this is actually part of the very practice of succession for the Ottomans. In fact, like many other Central Asian polities, they practiced something called tanistry. What that meant is that in Central Asian and Mongol Turkic polities, rather than just having the kind of realm or the kingship go to the eldest son, it actually could go to any male heir, any male relation. So, for example, after a sultan died, the next sultan could be his brother, an uncle, a nephew, a son. It could be any of those. And they basically could, but obviously the ones with stronger power backings amongst different factions in the court and the army, etc., were able to capitalize that. But for the first year or so, there was a moment of power consolidation in which they had to kind of figure out who's going to be on top. Now, the Ottomans took this to a different extreme in which not only any male heir could inherit, and often it was basically the sons, but the other son, whoever won, basically had to kill his brothers. So in this case, you have 5 brothers, one of them is going to win, and he's going to eliminate the other. This goes back to a question about why it is the Ottomans managed to succeed where other polities didn't, right? So we talked about location, we talked about centralizing policies, but another important aspect is the fact that when you have this system, when all the other brothers or claimants to the throne are eliminated, what that means is that the kingdom stays a whole. Otherwise, what happens is that in, like, say, the Timur kingdom or the Chinggisid kingdom or empire or any of these kind of Turkic things, when you have kind of multiple claimants and you don't have a clear person who's taking control, then what you have is basically, the place splits up amongst 3, a kingdom splits up into 3 or 4 or 2 or whatever. And this happens with every generation until they just become little princely states and then are invaded by some other invader after a few generations. But in the Ottoman case, by having the brothers kill the other brother, they, in ensuring that there's just one successor, they made sure that the entire kingdom stayed a whole. And so therefore the Ottoman Empire didn't break up into little mini statelets. It continued to remain an empire that continued to grow after every time. And you can imagine how this happens. The moment that the Sultan dies, the brothers they have to race to figure out this information, right? Whoever knows this has a head start on the others. And whoever's a head start basically races to the capital, secures the capital, but then also tries to figure out whose side are the Janissaries on, whose side are the frontier warriors and the raiders going to be on, whose side, how are we going to get the cavalry, the Sipahis to be on side, and where is the palace bureaucracy going to fit in, etc. You have to get all the different factions on your side, and then basically push out the others. And this created a lot of different power struggles over the course of the 15th and 16th and ultimately 16th century. And as we'll see, this also created a good amount of criticism. One small problem, though, is that once you eliminate the other brothers, the brothers have to basically, whoever wins has to kind of reproduce to keep the dynasty going. Often this isn't a problem because a lot of these sons already had had concubines and children of their own, young children, by the time they came to power. And so their children would eventually be able to succeed them, but this would be a problem later on. We'll get into it. Now, back in the day, everyone noticed that the Ottomans had this particularly bizarre form of succession, with the former Byzantine Emperor John Cantucuzenus called a barbaric practice. They said, "For they have a barbaric law to kill everyone who disputes for rule, and to spare neither for age nor kinship, for it is their custom to act thus not only towards those of other tribes, but also toward those of the same tribe also." So what he's saying is that these guys kill each other to remain king. And if we look at the images, like a description from a figure called Karamani Mehmed Pasha, originally is from Karaman, which is a rival to the Ottomans in South Anatolia, it kind of explains how this all worked in his history. He says, here he's talking about the death of Sultan Murad the first at the hands of a Croatian assassin after the Battle of Kosovo. He says, this was in the year 791 when he dies. The length of his reign, Murad I's reign was 30 years. In that year, the throne of the Sultanate was mounted by his felicitous son and the rightly guided successor who upheld him, blah, 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 Sultan Bayezid Khan. The guy gets defeated at the Battle of Ankara by Timur. He was just and valiant, a friend to the ulema, the scholars, and the dervishes, showing mercy to the rich and concern for the ascetics and the pious. To him, mighty monarchs turned their faces for every remote path, and toward him learned ulema made their way for every dissertation. He had a brother named Yaqub Chalabi, in whose survival lay great possibilities and mischief. Right, so this is the rival, which are not hidden from him who possesses sound intelligence. Hence the Sultan dealt with him as was necessary. Necessity justifies what is forbidden. What does that mean? Necessity justifies what is forbidden. It's kind of an excuse in Islamic law that if you're doing something for the greater good, if there is a necessary cause to eventually eliminate harm, and here the downfall of society, sedition, civil war, it's okay to kill your brother. And that's what they're saying here. Thus the inherited state remained under the hand of a valiant and generous and excellent sultan, without the rivalry of a rival or the contention of a contender. Now that we think about the fact of this form of tanistry, of this particular form of succession that was in the Ottoman case, where not only was it a form of tanistry, but they also eliminated the other brothers. We can also see that the Ottoman Civil War, in which 5 brothers fought each other, so the 3 that weren't captured, and then the 2 that were captured, that were eventually released back into Anatolia to start more war. This moment in which there's 5 equal contenders to the throne allows a space of kind of rebellion and openness, in which people who were unhappy with the Ottoman expansion, frontier warriors, maybe people who were recently conquered, could all of a sudden express themselves and ally and create new forms of rebellion. And this is one of them. It became known as the rebellion of a figure named Şeyh Bedreddin and he teamed up with another leader called Burkluce Mustafa, and they started a rebellion in what is today in essentially Izmir, over here in 1416, 1420. What's interesting about the rebellion is a few things here. One is that they have 4,000 to 5,000 people in this Karaburun Peninsula, but they really bring together a new coalition of people. They have Turkmen, so nomadic Turks. They have Sufis, they have frontier warriors, and they have Christian peasants, right? So they have a whole mix of all these different people who are finding a message in Şeyh Bedreddin. And Şeyh Bedreddin is in some ways also himself an interesting figure. He is the son of a frontier warrior, and also the son of his mother was a Byzantine or a local Christian lord's daughter, and he himself, basically one of these Sufi sheikhs on the frontier. But he also goes to Cairo and gets training in various Islamic legal sciences, and he comes back to Anatolia, starts this rebellion, and through his rhetoric, which emphasizes heavily kind of the equality of all, the fact that they should get rid of these new distinctions between military and non-military taxpayers and non-taxpayers, that there should be some sort of deep equality in society, found a following amongst a lot of different people. Ultimately, the rebellion was put down. After the end of this Ottoman civil war, the new sultan was able to turn his attention to this rebellion and ultimately starved them out and killed them. So that rebellion ended, but the legend of Şeyh Bedreddin continues, especially interesting enough, in leftist circles, because he's seen as this kind of almost proto-communist figure who was preaching for equality and equal distribution of land and resources for all. He's turned into a leftist hero, partially by this figure called Nazım Hikmet, you can see here on this Soviet postage stamp, who was a very important Turkish poet in the early 20th century. Eventually is banished from Turkey and has to flee to the Soviet Union for his communist leanings. But he wrote a very important book called The Legend of Bedreddin Destani. And he tells kind of this in verse, the story of Bedreddin. This becomes ingrained in the imagination of contemporary Turkey. Something to keep in mind as we think about the Ottoman Interregnum, dynastic policies, and their overall impact. Bye.